This is my low-tech filterless Walstad method betta fish tank. It's a 30 litre or 8 US gallon setup which is designed to be as budget friendly as possible and uses a layer of topsoil as its nutrient layer, which is then capped with a layer of fine gravel. The fast-grown plants provide all of the filtration the tank needs, while its inhabitants include one of my betta fish, a horned nerite snail and a colony of snowball neocaridina shrimp. This is the month 2 update, and the tank was taking shape at the start of month 2, and the water lettuce was exploding across the surface due to the amount of excess nutrients released during the initial setup from the topsoil. The roots quickly grew so large that they blocked the view of most of the tank, so I decided to remove all of the water lettuce and stick with red root floaters in this tank. Because my 40-gallon community tank has been struggling with excess nitrates and phosphates leading to algae issues, I decided to move all of the water lettuce over there to try and get things under control. During month 2, I also introduced 14 snowball neocaridina shrimp to the tank. By this point, the water parameters had been safe and stable for a while, so it was a perfect time to get some shrimp in there. I went with the white variety because they'd contrast nicely with the black lava rock and substrate that I'd chosen for the scape, but I was a little concerned that the lighter colour may make it easier for my betta to spot them. As soon as they were in, the shrimp immediately got to work grazing on the algae, and honestly I still think these are one of the most underrated algae eaters in the hobby, especially when it comes to softer algae types. In my experience, it really doesn't take long for any variety of neocaridina shrimp to get the soft brown and soft green algae which is common during a new tank setup under control, and it usually takes a week or 2. So moving on, and we get to maintenance, and this tank has been pretty easy to keep so far. I usually start by gently tapping the floating plants to scare off any shrimp that may be grazing on algae or biofilm before I remove them from the tank. After that, I do the exact same with the Limnophila Sessiliflora stems in the back of the tank by gently tapping them to scare away any shrimp before I trim them with my clippers. I don't do anything fancy here. In my experience, most stem plants are very hardy and you can just trim them as you please with some aquascaping shears or some scissors or anything like that. This round of trimming did release quite a lot of the algae back into the water column that was resting on the plant, so I decided to give the shrimp a hand by doing a water change to manually remove as much algae as possible. While shrimp do eat soft algae, I always target feed them anyway with a high protein food, and they definitely seem to prefer those over just needing to eat the algae. I did quickly check my bucket of water that I removed from the tank to see if I'd sucked any shrimp up with my siphon by accident, but thankfully I was good to go. I also noticed a shrimp molt in the tank after refilling it with water, showing that these new shrimp are able to molt in my water parameters, which is a good sign. Originally, I was planning on adding one of my friend's Betta imbellis to the tank, but I ended up finding a Betta mahachiensis online and decided to pick it up instead because they are a beautiful wild type Betta. Before introducing him to the tank, I wanted to get it in a better shape, so I decided to do some more maintenance. There was still some algae on the substrate, and the Echinodorus Aquartica had started to decay its immersed out of water grown leaves, so I wanted to trim those as well. After the trim, the Echinodorus does look tiny, but it will regrow healthy submerged form leaves that'll max out at around 8 inches or 20 centimeters tall. I also did a water change and left the water level slightly lower than I'd like on the refill to reduce the chance of my new betta fish jumping out of the tank until it's had a chance to settle in. I have a short on my channel covering the unboxing of this betta, but honestly I did think he was dead on arrival because he was just listing side to side really badly. I have had a lot of people say that he looks like an alien betta because of his spade tail, but after reaching out to Frank's Bettas, who's an expert on betta fish, I've learned that wild populations of Betta mahachiensis can have either fantails or spade tails, so this guy could be a true wild type. That said, I do think he might have a slight deformity around his mouth just above the top of his lip, as the skull does seem to dip into his face a lot more than any of my other betta fish I've ever had. So far though, he does seem to be able to breathe from the surface without issue, but eating the pellets that I have for him has been a little hit and miss. But if we fast forward a week, we can see he has settled in nicely and he does swim around a lot, but he does swim differently compared to all of the other betta fish that I've had in my tanks. Rather than swimming with his tail splayed out, he does tend to clamp them up a lot, and I was initially worried about him doing this. But thankfully he has started to colour up really well, and under the right light he looks incredible. As you can see, the plants are all doing really well, and I decided to order an Echinodorus Petite and some Monte Carlo to try and bring closer to my original vision for the tank. I did specifically take the time to look for a potted version of Monte Carlo rather than an in vitro cup, because in my experience the potted versions are hardier plants and easier to keep. The role of the Echinodorus Petite is simple. I just wanted something to cover the glue marks on the lava rock because they instantly catch my eye as soon as I looked at the tank. After planting, I was really happy with how things were looking, and once the Echinodorus grows in, the roots should completely hide the glue marks. The Monte Carlo, on the other hand, can be tricky to keep in low-tech setups, especially if you want it to carpet, so only time will tell if this works. I also decided to add a horned nerite snail to the tank because these little guys are excellent algae eaters for nano tanks. I'm pretty sure this was the first time my betta had ever seen a snail and he had no idea what to make of it. By this point he'd already inspected a lot of the shrimp in his tank without trying to eat them, and it was the same story with the snail. He did give it a long look, trying to work out whether he's supposed to eat it or it's supposed to eat him, but once he realised that it was neither, he just ignored it and carried on as normal. Unfortunately though, within a few days the Monte Carlo had started to melt again, but I was running the light at 50% intensity at this point to try and help control algae outbreaks, so I do think that might be part of the problem. Here's a clip of the betta after he'd had a chance to fully settle into his feeding routine. He was starting to associate me being near the tank glass as mealtime, and as you can see he does get excited. He'd also coloured up even more since the original unboxing, and when the light hits him correctly, he looks absolutely amazing. In this clip you can spot the snail and at least one of the shrimp, but as you can see he doesn't pay them any attention at all. He's mainly focused on any potential food or treats I'm about to give him. The next day he'd already figured out that feeding usually happens in the top left of the tank, so as soon as I walk up to his tank he goes straight there and looks at the surface. You can see some of the clamped fin and tail swimming that I mentioned earlier in this clip too, which I still didn't think was completely normal, and it did start to worry me a little bit. Here's a clip from later in that same day where he's just as active waiting for his food, but again you can see a shrimp in the bottom left corner of the tank, and again he completely ignores it. I do want to stress that not all bettas are shrimp friendly though, so it is worth keeping that in mind. During month 2 I took a trip down to Horizon Aquatics, an aquascaping specialist, and I picked up some Bacopa Compact White to try out in some of my tanks. At the time of recording this is still a rare plant in the hobby, but I really hope it becomes more mainstream and other nurseries pick it up because it has a lot of potential with its white coloration when grown correctly. Thankfully, I only added around 1/3 of the pot to this tank because my betta immediately took a disliking to it and decided to wriggle in the Bacopa Compact White every single day. His wriggling kept uprooting it, so I had to keep replanting it until I decided just to remove it and put it somewhere else because it was starting to deteriorate. This does seem to be a common thing with bettas because Marmalade, my other betta fish, did the exact same thing with the Monte Carlo in her old tank, and she'd wriggle in it every single day. A few days later I noticed that he'd built his first bubble nest in the tank too, which I did take as a sign that he was settling into the tank and happy. I have 3 tanks running Echinodorus A2 lights, and I've noticed a consistent problem with surface algae in all of them compared to the exact same Walstad setups that I have with low powered lights. I really do think that it's just because these lights are so powerful. Even at 50% of maximum intensity, they are still more powerful than everything else I have in my fish room. By this point I had started to run them all at 50% intensity, but the algae kept coming back. I found that the kitchen roll method has been easiest for me, and I just lay sheets of kitchen roll across the surface of the tank for a couple of seconds, the algae clings onto it and then you remove it all at once. I also decided to remove some of the excess floating plants, and I did do a partial water change and give the Limnophila Sessiliflora another trim. According to my notes, I actually turned the Echinodorus lights on all 3 tanks down to 40% of max intensity at this point as well. Unfortunately, at this time I was getting even more worried about the betta fish in this tank because I'd noticed that he's really not eating much, but he is just a juvenile and I am kind of comparing him to Marmalade, who's my fully grown betta, so it might just be that. He is a really curious little fish though, and I was doing maintenance on the tank directly to the right of his, and I glanced over and noticed him laying on the lava rock staring at me with one of the snowball shrimp next to him. The horned nerite snail is still thriving too, endlessly doing laps of the tank glass, grazing on any algae that I can find. To try and combat the surface algae constantly forming on these new tanks, I did order some USB water pumps to add a little bit of flow to the tank. The problem is, betta fish generally dislike strong currents, so I set it to the lowest possible setting and tucked it away in the corner to try and minimise disruption. I also added a 3D printed floating plant ring so the pellets would stay in one place and not be pushed around by the water flow. The betta fish was hesitant to use it at first, but eventually I did see him eat a few of the pellets, which is a good sign because he hasn't been eating much, unfortunately. A few hours later though, I did notice that he was spending most of his time hiding in the plants even when I was approaching the tank. So I decided to rotate the pump through 90 degrees to redirect the flow away from the front of the tank to see if that could get him to come out. But the following day I just decided to turn it off completely, and within minutes my betta came out of his hiding spot and swam to the front to greet me, expecting some food. I really don't want to lower the light on this tank anymore, but if the algae does come back I might add a small Night Crew Slim hang-on back filter instead, because on their low setting they probably generate less water flow than the water pump. Unfortunately, the betta is still acting a little strange in the tank, often clamping its fins, but I am starting to think that this could be normal for some wild type bettas. I've been watching videos from Tank in the Habit on TikTok, and his Betta smaragdina, which is another wild type species from the Splendid complex similar to my Betta mahachiensis, often seems to swim in the very same way. A few people have asked me what I've named the betta, but currently he doesn't have a name yet, and my friend's little girl wants to give him a name because I let her sister name one of my other fish, so it's basically up to her. Thankfully, the shrimp colony in here do seem to be thriving, which makes me very confident water quality isn't a reason that the bettas potentially having issues, because in my experience, shrimp are a lot more sensitive to problems with their water than fish. Now, I haven't seen any of the female shrimp carrying eggs yet, but a few of them are saddled, ready to breed, so hopefully within the next couple of weeks I'll get some baby shrimp in the tank too. The horned nerite snail just keeps itself to itself, and with there being so many hiding spots in the tank it's hard to see it most of the time, but it seems to be perfectly fine and going about its business without my betta doing any problems. One downside of having to turn the light intensity down is that my Rotala Blood Red has lost a lot of its red coloration and it's looking pretty pathetic right now if I'm honest, but over the coming weeks I do want to try and slowly turn up the light intensity again. Unfortunately, the Monte Carlo is melting away again, so I think I'm done with that plant with this specific setup. I can't decide if I want to use another carpeting plant in here or maybe a mix of Crypt Parva and Crypt Albida Brown in the foreground just to add some pops of colour. I have moved the rest of the Bacopa Compact White to another tank since it never stood a chance in here with my betta fish constantly wriggling in it. Overall, I am really happy with how the tank's progressing, but I am a little concerned about how the betta fish is behaving, but hopefully I'll start eating a little bit more and go back to its active self over time. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I will link to the playlist for this video in the description for anyone who wants to watch the monthly updates in order. Thanks for watching and good luck with your betta fish tanks.